Om Jnana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Yam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Varun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so I'll share my screen and we'll continue off from last week. And then this week we'll be able to get into that real beginning of Bhagavad-Gita where Arjuna, he's presenting all of his doubts. I'm sure everyone's had that experience. When you first read Arjuna's doubts, you feel like Krishna's just going to agree with him for the rest of the book. They're so well presented, right? And then, yeah, we'll find quite the opposite. Okay, there we go. Those diplomas. Okay, so just quickly touching back from last week, I'll start again from Duryodhana's diplomacy at text 2, and I'll just quickly refresh it. Just because we stopped in the middle of that section, and also because I find in the last half hour of the 2 hours, everyone gets a bit, foggy, so a little mentally foggy. So we'll track along with that. So as we discussed, we hear Duryodhana. He approaches Dronacharya. This is said by Sanjaya in order to reinforce and encourage Dhritarashtra, who's getting very worried that the fight wouldn't go ahead. And then we hear that he's saying, "Oh, my teacher, behold the great armies of the sons of Pandu, so expertly arranged by your intelligent disciple, the son of Drupad." And again, we've discussed Tava Shishyena, your disciple. You can check last week if you want to see all of the different meanings that entails. But remember, that's a point of emphasis. Then we kept on, and he's encouraging the armies to fight by mentioning all of the wonderful fighters on the other side, all of the great Maharajas, like Yudhana, Virata, Bhima, Arjuna. Like this, we find a description in order to get his armies worked up and scared to fight. Then we hear further descriptions, and then it turns around, and we have the we have an address to Dronacharya and Bhishma in order to keep them encouraged, in order to keep them engaged. And there's also a mention of different individuals in order to prevent them from going to the other side, and also in order to encourage Bhishma and Drona. Now, one may wonder, why did they need encouragement? Because what does Prabhupada write in the purport? Prabhupada writes that Duryodhana, he is very confident that they will fight for him. Does anyone remember the reason why? Prabhupada mentions it in the purports. Why is Duryodhana confident?
Because when Draupadi was being disrobed and she sought their assistance and their protection, they said nothing.
Exactly. So because of this, Duryodhana, he could be rather confident they're going to be on my side. If they were on my side that time during this terrible violation of dharma, then this is going to be nothing, right? I don't have to encourage them. Instead, the reason why he's speaking this is to encourage them to fight intensely, right? He's encouraging them to fight so that they don't hold back because of the love and affection that they have for the Pandavas, right? Okay. So we were discussing that. And of course, there is the key respect given to Brahmins before Kshatriyas. And we will discuss a little bit more of topics like that a little later on. So then now we've sort of roughly just got the trajectory. We've got the rough direction that we were taking. Now let us go to the next text. And the next text is, here we go. So we've got 1.9. We also discussed Saraswati on the tongue of Duryodhan, explaining that there are all these people ready to die and die they will. And then we have this very, very famous shlok, and we're going to focus on this one a tiny bit to make a few points. And this one, I think, very much embodies the double-natured tongue of Duryodhan. Who would like to recite the Sanskrit? Maybe Vidhi Mataji, would you like to recite the Sanskrit?
Prabhu, I'll be really bad at it.
Okay, okay. Katyayani Prabhu?
I'll try, Prabhu. Aprayaptam tad asmakam balam Bhishma rakshitam prayaptam tvaidam istam balam rakshitam.
Jai, very nice. And then maybe Srinivas Prabhu would like to read out the English then.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Our strength is immeasurable and we are perfectly protected by grandfather Bhishma, whereas the strength of the Pandavas, carefully protected by Bhima, is limited.
Jai, Jai, very good. Okay, so this is an interesting description, right? So what we're finding here is that Duryodhan, he's talking about the strength of their army. And what is he saying? He's saying aparyaptam, right? This is an immeasurable strength. Our armies are so very strong, right? And their armies, what are their armies? Paryaptam, they're limited. They're not so strong, right? But the interesting thing is in Sanskrit, both of these words can mean its opposites. Sanskrit could be a very confusing language. And so aparyaptam can also mean limited, right? And paryaptam can also mean immeasurable. So they can also mean their opposites. And this is something that is often focused on in Bhakti-śāstrī courses, and I think rightfully so. We'll find in the two different translations that are given by our previous acharyas, opposite translations are given. Nandan Prabhu, would you like to read out Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Tika?
Yes, Prabhu. Our army protected by Bhishma is inadequate, but their army protected by Bhima is adequate.
And then maybe Jaswant Prabhu, would you like to read out Baladev Vidya Bhushan's translation? Oh, I don't think Prabhu can. Then let's hear from Sri Mataji. Would you like to read out Baladev Vidya Bhushan's translation?
Our army is protected by Bhishma. Our army protected by Bhishma is immeasurable, but their army protected by Bhima is limited. Okay. Can everyone see? Can everyone track the contrast between these two, right? So one of them is saying that Bhishma's army, right? This one is great. This one is immeasurable, and the other one is saying that it's inadequate, right? So there is a difference here. In fact, there's opposite meanings taken. This is not, how should we say, contradictory, though. This is reflecting Duryodhan's words being very pregnant with meaning, right? There's a lot of depth to them, and he's very intelligently probing through and making his statements in a political manner.
Prabhupada, he writes in an earlier purport in this chapter that Duryodhana is a very expert politician. And we can find this here, the double speak, right? He's speaking out of both sides of his mouth, so to speak. Why though? What point is he trying to make? Well, there's two ways we can understand this. On the one hand, we understand that Bhishma is the greatest warrior alive, right? Bhima, as great as he is, you know, he can't really compare with the grandiosity of Bhishma, right? Bhishma is more experienced, more effective, and much greater at fighting than Bhima is, right? So in this sense, in the more basic sense, we can understand, of course, right? Bhim's army is not going to be as effective at fighting, but Bhishma's will. But on the deeper level, Duryodhana, what has he been doing this whole time? He's been encouraging Bhishma to do what? To fight effectively, to fight strongly, right? Why is he doing this? Because he can sense the restraint, right? He can acknowledge the fact that Bhishma, he is a little hesitant to fight. He is a little hesitant to kill. And therefore, in this sense, Bhima's is very adequate because Bhima is not going to hold back. We all know Bhima, he's vowed to do much more than hold back, right? He's vowed to do much more than fight full-heartedly. He's vowed to kill every single of the 100 children, right? The 100 sons. He's vowed, right, to rip out Dushasana's heart, right? He's vowed to do all of these things. So Bhima, he's not holding back, but Bhishma, the beloved Pandavas, right? He's going to have some sympathy in his heart. He's going to fight. He's going to do what he said he will do, but he's not going to do any more than the bare minimum. And this is the worry of Duryodhana. And therefore he has expressed this in the two directions, right? So these two completely different takes. Now, the reason why this is often mentioned, this is a very iconic example of the fact that Bhagavad-Gītā is very deep. When we are studying this Bhakti-śāstrī, I would love to take to go into all the detail we can into each shlok, but there just isn't the time, right? This is only an overview course. But it's important to note this. At the end of Bhakti-śāstrī, we will have an overview of the Bhagavad-Gītā. We will not have in-depth knowledge necessarily. And we likely will never have in-depth knowledge. There's too much depth to really say you've gone in-depth into it. But also to make the point that Shastra in general, it can be taken so many ways. And sometimes our acharyas disagree with each other, apparently, right? But they're not disagreeing in substance. They're disagreeing in mood. They're each trying to bring out their own moods, their own realizations, their own perspectives of the text. And those ones can be different, right? Krishna, he is so unlimited. We know when Krishna was fighting in the arena, right? When he was going to kill Kamsa, right? When he's fighting in the arena, everyone sees him and they all see him differently, right? Some see him as his relative. Some see him as a thunderbolt. Some see him as the most beautiful boy. Some see him as the most charming lover, right? We find all of these different forms are seen, right? And it's not that some are false and some are true. Some are false, actually. But it's not that only one is true, right? All of these different perspectives are taken. And we have the same with Shastra. Shastra is none other than Krishna himself, right? So with Shastra as well, we'll find different perspectives are taken. And it is not that one is false and the other one is correct. It's that these are different perspectives of experiencing these transcendental truths. That's not to say that every perspective is possible, right? Not that any single opinion you come up with is possible, but there are unlimited possible perspectives, right? Not every perspective is possible, but of those perspectives that are possible, there are unlimited flavors of them. Okay, so continuing on then, we then hear that the following text is text 11. Ayaneshu cha sarveshu yattha bhagam avistitaha bhishmam eva bhirakshantu bhavanta sarva eva hi. Mrunal Mataji, would you like to read out the English, please?
Okay, Hare Krishna. So all of you must now give full support to Grandfather Bhishma as you stand at your respective strategic points of entrance into the flanks of the army.
Jai. So here we find he's continuing on from this point. So he's made this point, you know, He's made this point that Bhishma, we don't know where his loyalties really lie deep down. He's made all of this doublespeak the whole time through. And now with this text, we'll find he concludes this doublespeak. He concludes it. And what is he saying? He's saying, give all your support to Bhishma, right? And this can be taken again in two ways. Either Duryodhana is saying, Bhishma, he is our greatest and most valuable warrior, right? He is our most valuable warrior, so everyone get around him because he is so valuable. Our victory rides with him, right? Support our great and valiant warrior. This could be one meaning. And the other meaning is that Bhishma, he's an old man now. I don't think he's really too committed to fighting. Everyone get around him so that he doesn't die too quickly. So we find here again, there are these two different implications that can be drawn out. And Duryodhana, he is so clever that he's not committing to either one, right? He's throwing all of his ideas out there so that whoever hears whatever they need to hear will hear it. Again, we find the masterful diplomacy, the masterful political strategy of Duryodhana. Another reason that comes up, and I'm now mind blanking the name. Who is the name of the she was taken to be married off and then she refused to because she was already in love and then she became a man. What's her name?
Amba.
Amba, yes.
Amba.
And what's her name now as a man? That's what I'm forgetting. I'm remembering Amba, but
Shikhandi.
Yes, there we go. So because Shikhandi was present on the battlefield, right? Most people weren't aware. This is a third meaning that's also given, and it's more in line with the second one, right? That Bhishma might die, because most of them weren't aware that Shikhandi was a woman, right? Before, but Bhishma was, and Bhishma, it goes against Kshatriya codes to kill a woman, right? This is considered, women and children should be protected, not killed, right? So because of this, Bhishma had the knowledge that he was a she before, right? So because of that, he couldn't bring himself to kill Shikhandi. So there was also the fear, right? There was an awareness that Bhishma would have this hesitancy. And therefore, it was said, protect Bhishma from Shikhandi. Because if Shikhandi attacks, Bhishma will not try to attack back. So all of you, make sure you take out Shikhandi before he reaches Bhishma, right? So those are the three levels of meaning. So now we've concluded Duryodhana's very diplomatic, very political words. Now we get on to the next topic, which is the Pandava signs of victory. So we'll find here, this next section is very much describing, just to make clear, right? It's almost like Sanjaya, he's slowly breaking it to Dhritarashtra that your sons definitely lose, because we'll find lots and lots of hints and signs and signals that there will be a Dhritarashtra, that there will be a Duryodhana side loss in this war. Now we're going to do breakout rooms quickly in order, before we go into these signs. We're going to break out into rooms. I'll give you all 10 minutes. I'll set a timer this time for the rooms. I'll give you all 10 minutes to find 4 signs of Pandava victory. I have 9 on a slide later on, which I've shamelessly plagiarized from Gauranga Priya Prabhu's notes, just being upfront there. But we'll have 9 to compare it against. But first, His Holiness Purnachandra Goswami, he says that if you're stuck in a dark room and somebody gives you a key and tells you where it was, you'll never really remember where the key was. But if you had to search around the room the whole time in the dark and you eventually found it, you'll never forget where you found the key, right? So it's nice maybe for us to find it, to try and find the signs of Pandava victory in these shlokas first. And then later on, we can compare notes with each other. So we'll break out into breakout rooms. How many people are there? 15. So let's do, okay, we'll do 4 groups and there's going to be one slightly smaller group. Breakout rooms, 4 groups, assign automatically. Yeah, breakout rooms automatically after. So 10 minutes, if you can find. So just to give a hint, a lot of them are after the shloka we're up to, but there's also a few around in this general vicinity. Countdown time. Okay. So is everyone clear on the activity? Each group needs to come back with 4 signs of Pandava victory. If you find any more, go ahead, if you find them all rather quickly. Okay, Hare Krishna, I'll see you on the other side. Okay, just wait for everyone to get back. Ooh. Oh. Okay, I think that's all groups back, right? Yes. Okay, so we had 4 groups. Let's all collate our reasons. I think first we'll have 1 reason from each group, and then if there's any left over, right? And that way, it's impossible for us to have a group that says, we've already said them all, which is, yeah. Let's have, I always go on people whose videos are on so I can, as a visual guide, let's have a Tarun Prabhu's group.
The first one, on Pandava side, they had the Divya Shank.
Yes, the Transcendental conch shells. Very nice. Okay, then let's hear Katyayani Mataji and Srinivas Prabhu. You were in a different group, right?
Yeah, on behalf of our group, Nandan Prabhu will present, Prabhuji.
Okay, then let's hear from His Grace Nandan.
Prabhu, we found 9.
9 Jai.
Yeah, and we were able to pinpoint the verses as well.
Jai.
So the glories to our group, our best group. Joking. And so we had a nice one, which was the goddess of fortune is always present with Krishna, and it's in the purport of 120. Wherever there is Hanuman in the flag, there is Rama, and wherever there's Rama, there's the goddess of fortune, Sita. And so that signifies victory.
Jai, nectar. I'm curious to see how your 9 goes against this 9 and the verse references. Or did you just check Gauranga Priya Prabhu's notes as well?
No, Prabhu. We're legitimate.
Not a cheat like me. Okay, who else? Now I'm forgetting how the groups broke down. Rohan Prabhu, your group?
Yeah, I think we got 6.
Yes, Jai.
So I don't think it's been mentioned. Just Kurukshetra being Dharmashetra.
Yes, very nice. And then who was the last group? That was Nitai's group, wasn't it? No. Nitai's, it was Nitai's group. Yes.
Left, yeah. Actually, it was the chariot on which Arjuna and the Lord were seated, because it was given by the fire god, the Agnidev, which can conquer all worlds.
Jai, 100%. That's exactly it. Okay. Did anyone have any other ones that haven't been mentioned yet?
I think there is one, Prabhuji, where the Pandavas had confidence that Krishna is there with them.
Yes, Krishna's
presence.
Confidence.
Yeah, Pandavas' confidence in Krishna. Yeah.
Yes.
Just
okay.
One more, Prabhuji. Right. So the Lord Hanuman is present on the flag of Arjuna.
Yes. Kapi Dhvaja. That's the name of Arjuna, meaning the one who has Hanuman on the. Yep.
Prabhu, there's the mention of Bhima, and we already know his vows. He's already promised to conquer the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, and they are sitting on the other side. And we know a Kshatriya always keeps their vows unless they get defeated. And we know Bhima won't get defeated because he's mentioned as Vikodara. And that's at 115. There was one question I had, and I mentioned it to the group, and I didn't know if it was a sign, but we saw already that with Duryodhan, he's already having a double meaning speak, which shows that there's some kind of disunity amongst that faction. But here, there is no doubt that they're all going to enter into this. The only one doubt that eventuates is Arjuna, but the rest of them are quite united. They're all blowing their conch shells together. They're all together, and you can feel that. Is that a sign of victory?
For sure, it's not on the list, but that's why I was interested to see what you all come up with, because I remember when I did Bhakti-śāstrī, we also had a list, and everyone came up with so many things that weren't on the list. There's actually so many signs on there, and that's definitely one of them. It sort of gets subsumed under the breaking of the hearts of the Kauravas, but definitely that's a separate one for sure. You can all take note of that one. Duryodhana's diplomatic words themselves are evidence of the lack of certainty of victory. Okay, if that's all good, then I'll show the list that I took with some references as well. As you can see, there's really just, besides Dharma Kshetri, Kurukshetri, as Rohan Prabhu noted, they're all in either, they're all among basically these two shloks, 1.14 and 1.12. But we also find 19 and 20 mentioned for Hanuman's flags, and of course the conch shells themselves being blown. Okay, if you'd like, I can send this list into the group chat so people don't have to copy it down, unless you've already copied it down a fair bit. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide then, if that's all good. So here we find just a reference from Srimad Bhagavatam about how Agni, he presented Arjuna with all of these items. I guess we find this is the reference to Agni presenting all of these tools that have been used, and they've all been sourced though from different demigods. If I'm now forgetting who gave what, let me check. It'll be in my notes somewhere. But we find that different demigods actually sourced them. They didn't all come from Agni, but Agni is the one who gave the chariot. I'll find it later on. So we find here that all of these items have been given, and therefore, yes, just Prabhu.
Prabhu, from the list what you've shown just now, so
yeah,
there is 1.12. So I didn't really understood how that's related to the victory.
From here?
Yeah.
Which one?
1.12. Bhishma's consul to pacify the Duryodhana.
When we read the shlok, then we will discuss.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, no. That one's not necessarily clear, but when we read the shlok, we'll discuss. Yeah, so we find here, these are all auspicious. Actually, each one of these items you could list as a different item. I would mark all those as valid reasons. If you can find the demigod who provided them, which I seem to not be able to. So then we can continue on now to, of course, the flag of Hanuman, right? So Hanuman's flag is a very significant one. Maybe we could have Divyansh Prabhu. Would you like to read out this lecture? Divyansh Prabhu, you've unmuted, but I can't hear you speak.
Hello?
Oh, now I can hear you. Jai.
Yeah,
okay.
I think my headphones are not connected. I don't know why they're not working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just read this one. You guys can hear me clearly, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. The flag was on, lecture Bhagavad-Gītā 1.20, 17/7/1973, London. The flag was on the top of his chariot, and it was marked with Hanuman, Vajrangji, Vajrangi Hanuman.
Vajrangaji.
Vajrangaji.
Arms with thunderbolts.
Hanuman. Yep. Who fought for Lord Ramchandra. He is fighting for Krishna. So he is following the footsteps of Vajrangi. Vaishnavism is like that. Mahajano yeno gata sa pantha. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 17.186. Mahajano yena gata sa pantha. Vaishnav should follow his previous Mahajana authority. This is Vaishnavism. We don't manufacture ideas. We don't commit such rascaldom. We simply accept the behavior of or the activities of previous acharya. There is no difficulty. So in the fighting principle, Arjuna is fighting for Krishna. He is following the previous fighting acharya, Hanumanji. Therefore, he has depicted his flag with Hanuman, that Hanumanji, Vajrangi, kindly help me. This is Vaishnavism.
Jai.
Thank you.
Haribo, very nice. So we can see here Prabhupada, he's pulled out this very interesting purport, this very interesting import, if you will, of the flag, right? Arjuna here, he is following through in the authorities. Now, there's two pastimes that I've heard explaining why Hanuman's flag is on the chariot. We'll go through them. The first pastime that I heard about this is not the one that's most popularly said. I've only heard it from a few sadhus, but I've heard it from more than one sadhu. So I can say with some confidence that there's probably some source around it, unless they're all just listening to each other's classes. And even then, I'm sure they didn't just make it up. So I just haven't found the textual source for this pastime. So the pastime goes that once Arjuna, who, as we know, is a great archer, right? He's very talented in the skills of archery. And so he was walking and strolling down a bank one day, right? And he was carrying the Gandiva bow. And there he saw an old monkey sitting on the side of a river. And paying his dandavats to the monkey, Arjuna, he asks, who are you? And the monkey, he replies, my name is Hanuman. I am the servant of Sri Ramchandra. And Arjuna, then he thinks, oh, okay, yeah. And he says, are you the servant of the same Ram who, unable to make a bridge of arrows over the ocean, employed monkeys to build a bridge of stones? It was only then that his army could cross the ocean. If I had been there, the famous Arjuna, I would have built such a strong bridge of arrows that the entire army could have easily crossed over, right? So now Arjuna, he's taunting Hanuman, if you will. No, Bhima is the other pastime. Varun, that's the second pastime we'll get onto. So Hanuman then, he replies, he says, but your bridge would not have endured the weight of even the weakest monkey in my army, right? So there's a bit of a back and forth going on. Arjuna, he said, oh, your bridge was terrible. And then Hanuman saying, oh, you don't even know what you're talking about. You're talking with all your Dwapar Yuga armies. You don't know what it was like back in the day, right? Those armies were some serious stuff. So like this, we hear a back and forth. So then Arjuna, he says, okay, I'll meet your challenge. I'm going to make a bridge of arrows over this river, and you may cross it with as heavy a load as you can carry. So Hanuman then, he expanded himself into his largest form, and he went to the Himalayas. And going to the Himalayas, he tied heavy stones with his hair. With each hair, he tied each one onto a stone. I don't know how many of you watched Dragon Ball growing up, but it's like when Goku puts the weights on his feet. I don't know how many of you watched Dragon Ball, but it was a cartoon. And yeah, Goku, he would put the weights on his feet while training. So this is what Hanuman's doing. Yeah. So Hanuman, he's putting all of these weights onto himself to make himself as heavy as possible. And as soon as he put as soon as he made the first step onto the bridge, instantly it began to waver, right? Instantly it began to struggle. But surprisingly enough, Arjuna, he's following up on his taunt, and it does not break, right? Ooh. So then Arjuna, though, he becomes afraid. He thinks, well, surely this wouldn't have struggled at all. So remembering Krishna, he prays. He says, oh, Krishna, hey, Yadav. He says, oh, Lord, the honor of the Pandavas is in your hands. Please preserve this bridge. So when Hanuman then put the full weight, right, he put both of his feet onto the bridge. He was again surprised. He thought, I'm pretty heavy, right? And the bridge isn't breaking. So the bridge did not break, because if the bridge did break, it would be a great matter of shame for Hanuman. Right? So within his heart, Hanuman, he begins to start praying to Ramchandra, and he says, oh, Ramchandra, my honor is in your hands. As he's walking now across the bridge, he looks under the bridge just to see how the strength of the bridge is going. And as he looks, he sees that it's no longer water flowing in the river, but instead it is streams of blood. Hanuman immediately, he jumps off the bridge and he tries to see, where is his blood coming from? What is this? He cries out, completely shocked, completely concerned. And then he sees, my worshipful Lord, Sri Ramchandra, he is personally supporting the bridge of sharp arrows on his back. At once, Hanuman, he falls down and begins to worship Lord Ramchandra. And at the same moment, Arjuna, he's seeing the blood and he's saying, what is this? My dear Lord Krishna, he is supporting this bridge of arrows on his back. How could this have happened? How could my dear Lord Krishna be doing this, right? And so both of them, Hanuman, he saw Ramchandra, and Arjuna, he saw Krishna. And like this, both of them lowered their heads in shame and they said, how could we have asked you, our worshipful Lord, to do something so intense, so painful, so terrible for us? And therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself, he said, there is no difference between these two forms of mine. I, Krishna, in the form of Sri Ram, came to establish morality as the Maryada Purushottam. And in the form of Krishna, I've come to establish my beautiful pastimes as the Leela Purushottam, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am the personification of all rasas as Krishna, and therefore I am the most supreme. But do not forget that I am also none different to Lord Ramchandra. From today onwards, you who are both my servants should become friends. In a battle in the near future, the mighty Hanuman, situated on the flag of Arjuna's chariot, will give him protection in all directions on the battlefield. So this is one pastime. Again, I haven't found the Shastric reference for it, but I've heard it a few times, and I was just reading off my notes because it's a bit of a windy pastime. Now there's a few messages. Okay, yes, the Dragon Ball waits. I just wanted you all to get a visual image. So then the other pastime is the more famous pastime, and this is the one from the Mahabharata. I think many of you will know this pastime. How many of you had heard that one before with the arrows, the bridge of arrows?
Where did you hear it from?
I heard it from Purna Chandra Goswami. He's the last. I definitely have heard it before in other classes before, but I'm just asking to see citations, right? Purna Chandra Goswami, he's the person who I can remember saying it, but I definitely had heard it before him. Vidhi Mataji, you'd also heard the pastime before.
Yeah, I just heard it on YouTube on one of the ISKCON temples videos.
Yes, it's one of those stories. It's like Shukadev's parrot. It's like Shukadev being a parrot. Maybe you've heard the story from Bhagavatam that Shukadev was Radharani's parrot.
Correct.
I don't know where this story came from. It's not in any Shastra, right? So who knows?
Yeah.
Yes, who knows where the story is from? It's my mission to hunt it down, find the pramana. Anyway, so the other pastime then is, as we know, in the Mahabharata, we find that while Arjuna, he was seeking celestial weapons, all of the Pandavas, they were in Badarik ashram. And when they were traveling across the Alakanda river, it carried to Draupadi a beautiful and fragrant 1,000-petaled lotus flower. And when Draupadi saw it, we know she very, very much wanted one, right? To offer to Yudhishthira Maharaj. So she asks Bhim, who is, the great strong adventurer, please go find me one. So Bhim, he grabs his weapons and he charges up the mountainside, right? In order to find it, traveling up the river pathway. And as he ran, right, he scared away all the elephants and lions and all the other things that normally prevent people from exploring this area. He's picking up trees and moving them aside. He's just being Bhim, right? he's very much in character. He's just uprooting anything that's getting in his way. And as he's going along, he steps right into the path of a huge monkey lying across on his path. And the monkey, he's saying, why are you causing such trouble? Why are you just disturbing everything? Just sit down and have some fruit, return to monkey, as they say. And Bhim, he says, move aside, I have nothing to do with you, right? But still, Bhim is a Kshatriya, and he's not going to violate the etiquette to step over someone, right? We know it's very sinful to step over someone else or to step over a book or something like this, right? So Bhim, he did not wish to do this. And so Hanuman, as we know, it is Hanuman, he says, I'm too old to move, just jump over me. And Bhim, he's getting angry. He's saying, I can't do that. Stop playing games, right? And then eventually Bhim is so annoyed, he just picks up the tail of Hanuman and moves it, or at least he tries to do so, but he's unable to do so. And so he's amazed that there's something so heavy that even Bhim cannot move it. And so he asks, who are you? What is the identity of this great person who is so strong that even I cannot move him? And then, of course, again, I'm sure most of us have had this pastime. Hanuman reveals that he is also a son of Vayu. And then they both embrace and they become very, very happy. They become very happy, Here we are, brothers, right? Meeting again. And upon being happy and sharing katha with each other, then Hanuman, he promises to Bhim, I shall remain present on the flag of your brother Arjuna. When you roar like a lion on the battlefield, my voice will join with yours to strike terror into the hearts of your enemies. You will be victorious and regain your kingdom. So there we find the other one. So the first benediction is that I will give protection in all directions. And the other benediction is that I will join in the shattering of hearts, right, of the opposing armies. So here we find this symptom of victory. Now we'll quickly go through verse by verse, and then we will begin the next section, which is Arjuna's doubts. So after all of these, after Duryodhana has said his diplomatic words, right? Text 13 sounds. Oh, text 12 sounds. And there we find the answer to Jaswant Prabhu's question. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten your question, Prabhu. We hear, Tasya sanjanayan harsham guru vridha pitamaha singhanadam vinadyochaihi sankhyam dadmao pratapavan. Maybe Jaswant Prabhu, would you like to read out the English?
Sure, Prabhu. The Bhishma, the great valiant grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, the grandfather of the fighters, blew his conch shell very loudly, making a sound like the roar of a lion, giving Duryodhana joy.
So here we find one of the signs of victory, right? So Bhishma, he's very nicely causing his conch to play. But what is the message that is being made? We know conch shells are a symbol of Vishnu, right? Conch shells are a symbol of Vishnu, and therefore he is signaling this is all just going in Vishnu's direction, right? This is all just going to go onto the side of that side which has that supreme personality of Godhead Vishnu. So here we find this point is being made. He's making the point to Duryodhana. You have said all of these words. You have tried your best to motivate us, but unfortunately victory is not in your hands. This is one reason, right? And this is the reason being a sign of the Pandava victory. Another reason that is given is Bhishma knew that if he plays his conch shell, he will be able to hear the wonderful transcendental conch shell of Krishna. And therefore with his desire to hear the melodious sound of Krishna playing, Krishna's musical abilities we know are so renowned, and they melt the heart of the whole universe. And therefore Bhishma wanted to hear the wonderful music that Krishna is capable of producing. And so like this we hear, now the whole army is starting, right? After that, the conch shells, drums, bugles, trumpets, and horns were all suddenly sounded, and the combined sound was tumultuous. Okay, and now we hear on the other side, Lord Krishna and Arjuna. This is where we have the introduction, of course, to Krishna and Arjuna. We find their first mention here. And as has been mentioned in the Signs of Victory, what is the first name we hear of Krishna? Madhava, right? Here we find Madhava is being mentioned, the husband of the goddess Fortune. And therefore there's only going to be fortune on this side. And then we hear all of them blowing their conch shells. And here we find them listed out here. So as we know, Krishna has Panchajanya. There's a whole pastime behind that, but if we do too many pastimes, we'll get too far behind on the syllabus. But there's a famous pastime. I'll send the chapter that relates how Krishna got Panchajanya and Krishna book into the WhatsApp group. Then Arjuna, he's playing Devadatta. Bhima is playing Paundra. Yudhishthira is playing his Ananta Vijay, right? Nakul is playing Sughosh, and Sahadev is playing my personal favorite, Manipushpaka, right? There we find all of the conch shells being listed. Now, the reason why I've listed these out is there's an interesting point, because we find there's a list of individuals whose conch shells are mentioned by name, right? But then there's also a list, on the other hand, of individuals whose conch shells aren't named. What's interesting is all those individuals whose names are named and whose conch shells are not named are individuals who pass away. So here we find foreshadowing. Those who will be slain in this battle, their conch shells are not mentioned, with the exception of Satyaki. But this is why we find very interestingly, in the Sanskrit, it describes Satyaki as being unconquerable, right? Aparajitaha. So it's not that we're saying there's some exception to Satyaki. The text is being very explicit. Satyaki is intentionally being mentioned here as unconquerable because he's the only one of this list that is not conquered. But everyone else, as we know, passes away in this fight, including the others. Sometimes people won't list the others, but there's many others who also pass away. Right. And so then we have the long list, and then we hear Saghosho dhartarashtranam hiddayani vyadayarat nabhascha prithivim chaiva tumulo bhyanunadayam. Right? Who would like to read out the translation of text 19 there?
Prabhuji? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I think Uma Mataji's screen went up first, but Vidhi Mataji, the next reading will get you to do. Okay.
Okay, 19 Prabhuji, translation.
Yes.
Thank you, Prabhuji. The blowing of these different conch shells became uproarious, vibrating both in the sky and on the earth. It shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. Thank you.
Yes, very nice. So here we find the other sign of victory, right? Their hearts are all being shattered, right? A shattered heart is not a positive omen, right? I don't think that needs too much more elaboration, but Srila Prabhupada, he gives a very nice point, very interesting point in his purport. In his purport, he says, even though it is not mentioned, we can understand by implication that the Pandavas' hearts were filled with feelings of victory. So therefore, we find this is a twofold sign. It is a sign of the loss of the Kauravas because their hearts are shattered, and it is also a sign of the victory of the Pandavas because their hearts are filled with feelings of victory. And then we get up to, then we hear, now we are beginning, now we are beginning to hear what we will discuss in the second half, Arjuna's eventual breakdown, right? Arjuna's issue. And how do we understand that Arjuna's tensions are beginning? We hear it in this text. This text, I believe, or maybe the later ones, but soon we're having a change of meter from the standard meter, and we're entering into a Trishtub meter, which is a more tension building one, right? It's the one which is saying tension is building. So not to get all literary on you, but we're finding this literary tool is being used. And what do we hear? In text 20, at that time, Arjuna, the son of Pandu, seated in the chariot bearing the flag marked with Hanuman, took up his bow and prepared to shoot his arrows, right? So Arjuna, he's preparing, he's taking up his bow. But what does he do then? He doesn't fire them. He doesn't begin to fight. He tells Krishna, show me the armies. Here we find Arjuna's hesitation is beginning. right? He's picked up his bow and arrow, but he is not using them. He's telling Krishna, show me the opposing armies. And how Krishna shows the opposing armies and all, we will touch upon in the second half. We'll have our 5-minute break now. But we'll find, before we go on the break, just quickly, this is a symbol that will continue on. In many ways, Arjuna holding his bow is a symbol of his certainty in the fight. Later on, we will find that as his doubts are building and building, the bow is slipping from his hand. And at the very end of the chapter, he will drop the bow. So keep in mind the bow. It's a very, again, not to get all literary on you, but it's symbolic of Arjuna's growing doubts and inability to have a will to fight. Okay, so we'll take our 5-minute break. I'll pause the recording, and then on the other side, we will discuss the Arjuna's doubts. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, before we continue ahead, I'm just opening up to any questions because we're closing off that section now. If anyone has any quick questions, otherwise we'll address them at the end. Yes, Rohan Prabhu.
So 1.4, you mentioned that Yuyudhana, Virata, Drupada, they're all Maharatis. That's why they mentioned.
Yeah.
Is there any significance in 1.5, Drishtaketu, Chiketana? Are they Maharatis?
Not to my knowledge. There might be. I haven't. As I said before, my Mahabharata knowledge is rather weak. But yeah, to my knowledge, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Could very well be. If I notice anything, I'll bring it up later on in the course. But okay. I haven't found any details like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mrugank Prabhu.
Hey, so I guess the point of that first section is that section about the signs of victory is to understand the presence of Krishna in our lives as well, right? Like when we're facing certain situations. Like in this case, Arjuna was facing, or the Pandavas were facing a situation that was where the odds were against them. And it's sort of like the section sort of implies that if you have these signs of Krishna with you, then you will be successful. So I feel like it doesn't always translate in our lives. So how do we understand that?
Well, that's a really good setup to the next section that we're going to touch on, which are Arjuna's doubts. Because Arjuna, that's the whole point, and that's what makes the Bhagavad-Gītā so great. Because Arjuna, even though he is guaranteed victory, he is still suffering so much at that moment, right? So even though there is that guidance and protections of Krishna, even though it's present there, still because of his incorrect way of viewing the world, and we'll touch upon his incorrect way of viewing the world, he's causing so much distress. And it's not a bad point either. It's not like it's something we can just tell him to get over it. Like, it's a legitimate point of distress. It's a legitimate point of pain and suffering, right? So the whole point of the Bhagavad-Gītā is that the whole reason I would say why that's there is, yes, we have the broader application that whenever we have Krishna in our life, we will have victory. But what it's doing in terms of the actual text is it's setting up the fact that now, even in light of all of this, Arjuna is depressed. Why, right? Why is he then, even though he's guaranteed victory, now he's about to have issues. Now he's about to have an existential crisis, right? He's going to have all of that, even though victory is guaranteed. It's setting up Arjuna's moments of doubts, if that makes sense. And it's trying to really invoke their relevance to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that answers it.
Yeah. So then we'll go on. Are there any other questions quickly before I dive into Arjuna's doubts? Okay, so again, as I mentioned at the beginning, everyone has that experience. The first time they read the Bhagavad-Gītā, even later times, it took me quite a few reads before I could really pick out where Arjuna goes wrong. Because the first few times you read Arjuna's doubts, you just think, well, he's correct, right? Who's going to disagree with this? And then you're almost a bit shell-shocked then when Krishna says, what are these foolish words? Because you read those words and you're like, well, they didn't sound too foolish to me, right? And I think there's a value in that, and I'll touch on that quickly. But before we touch completely on that. I first want to touch on a little tension that's found in the text. I've mentioned these two purports, but Prabhupada does it throughout. I don't know if anyone else noticed this. Did any of you notice that at sometimes Prabhupada, he's glorifying Arjuna, right? He's saying, wow, Arjuna is so compassionate. And at other times he's saying, this is the bewilderment of foolish people in material life, as we found here, the quotes. Did anyone else notice this while reading through? Yes, Nandan Prabhu, you.
Yeah, I think there's especially in, I found in 28, there's the mention of Arjuna's soft-heartedness and that being a quality of a pure devotee. And there's that verse from the Bhagavad-gītā. And so you're like, all right, well, he's a pure devotee, I guess. But then you've also got him raising very I guess like second grade materialistic points.
100%, and it's this tension in the purports. And again, I just want to encourage everyone, whenever you find something that feels contradictory, whenever you find something that seems wrong, I think it's good to explore that rather than to shut it down. Not to think I'm being offensive by thinking this, because there's often a point, there's often a deep point in it. So I think that, again, this is another example. It seems to be contradictory, as Nandan Prabhu said. What is he? Is he a pure devotee, or is he some bewildered person like you and me, right? Or at least me. So the resolution I find of this is also in the text. And we find one reference in the introduction and one also in the purport. In general, Prabhupada goes to strong lengths to make the point that Arjuna is a pure devotee. And maybe I should have switched these texts around, because the bottom one is the one which says that. Being an associate of the Lord, Arjuna, he's perfect. He's not going to have these issues. He's a pure devotee. He's not going to fall under the bewilderment of Maya. However, in order that this Bhagavad-Gītā might be spoken, Arjuna, he is being bewildered. And we'll find that as we go along deeper into these texts. Arjuna, being a pure devotee, he is actually being bewildered, but he's being bewildered by the internal potency of Krishna, Yoga Maya, the Maya which even bewilders Krishna, right? This Yoga Maya is bewildering him. And how is this Yoga Maya bewildering him? Yoga Maya and Mahamaya, the internal and external potencies, at the end of the day are still the potency of the Lord, right? They're both still Shakti. And therefore, Yoga Maya has completely within her capacity to give all of the apparent symptoms of Mahamaya. And therefore, Yoga Maya, she is influencing Arjuna to act as if he is under the influence of Mahamaya. And we find this also in mention of Krishna. He is mentioned several times to be Hrishikesh, right? Hrishikesh, or Hrishika, Isha, right? The Lord of the senses. And Prabhupada, he has a very nice purport in text 15, where he says the Lord, situated in the hearts of all living entities, directs their senses, but he directs them only in terms of the surrender of the living entity. And therefore, the pure devotees who are fully surrendered have their senses completely directed by Krishna. So Krishna, he is directing Arjuna to manifest all of these things, right? To manifest all of these symptoms, to manifest all of these things in order that the Bhagavad-Gītā might be spoken. And actually, this is true of the entirety of the Mahabharata. The whole Mahabharata is only there so that people will get interested to read the Bhagavad-Gītā, right? So I've heard some sadhus joke that the Mahabharata is sense gratification, because it's such a fun story, right? It's so engaging, right? Everyone loves it, all of the moral grays, the backstabbing, you know, all of these levels of story. It's a fun story, and it's meant to be, in order that everyone gets invested so that then they hear the Bhagavad-Gītā, right? So not just Arjuna's bewilderment, but actually this whole pastime is being built up just so that Krishna can speak the Bhagavad-Gītā. But especially on this point, we find that Arjuna, he is being directed like this. So he's being bewildered, but not by the material energy like we are, or at least I am, but by the spiritual energy. Now, there's a few more points to be made regarding this, right? So just to be clear, just so everyone takes home this point, Arjuna, he is not actually being bewildered by the external energy. Arjuna has not become a materialist or anything. Arjuna is a pure devotee playing the pastime of somebody bewildered, like materially bewildered, in order to fulfill the pastime of Krishna being able to speak the Bhagavad-Gītā. Actually, I'm gonna last second change the order of these slides. This will go backwards and touch those other slides. So with this, Arjuna teaches us a few things, right? Because Arjuna is still a pure devotee. His compassion is what is glorified by Prabhupada in the purports, right? Prabhupada is saying, this is the heart of the pure devotee. This is the heart of the softened devotee, right? This is what Prabhupada is glorifying. And therefore, Arjuna, he is still showing compassion and sympathy. But the heart of the pure devotee is being filtered through the lens of illusion. So his compassion is coming out naturally, and his compassion is glorious, and his compassion is beautiful. I'm not sure if I've mentioned the past time when Srila Prabhupada was with some of his disciples, and they were overlooking the laborers working. And his disciples said, oh, Prabhupada, you know, sometimes I feel bad for them, meaning I shouldn't feel bad for them, it's their karma. And then Prabhupada said, why only sometimes? All the time we should be feeling compassion. But the problem is, this compassion is being reflected, it's being filtered through illusion, right? So therefore, the heart is correct. Arjuna, he is having, you cannot undo the pure heart of the devotee, right? Yoga Maya is not undoing the compassion and love and those good qualities in his heart. But what it is doing is bewildering his mind's interpretation of that compassion, right? So Arjuna, it is not the message of the Bhagavad-Gītā, as many people will take, that Krishna is saying, stop caring, right? Close up your heart. Why are you caring? Why are you feeling this compassion? This is not why. Krishna is addressing a deeper concern, and we will get to that concern after we address all of Arjuna's doubts. After we overview them, we will be able to see the fault undergirding them all. So this is one point to be made. The other points that will be made about what Arjuna can teach us, we'll come back to later on. But now I just want to come to one point before we discuss all of the other things. And this is a point, in many ways, we can say everyone was, Duryodhan, he was very nervous in the build up to the battle, as we know, right? And as we get closer and closer to the battle, he gets more and more afraid. I can say I'm much like Duryodhan. The closer and closer we get to the purports about women, the more and more afraid I'm getting, right? Because sometimes these texts can be a little disturbing for some devotees. Some devotees can accept them as they are, right? And I would sort of say, I think both ends are making a mistake. Both ends are making a mistake in the way they're reading it. I just want to address this before we look into the arguments, because I know it gets in a lot of devotees' heads as they're reading through the arguments, right? So I sort of want to clarify this beforehand. This and also questions of varnashram and everything in general, right? I think, I'm sure we all read it, you know, all of the texts regarding the role of women and also, you know, the role of the different varnas, right? Varna is sometimes translated caste. I strongly disagree with this translation because it's nothing like caste as we have today. And this is not just my opinion, it's not just the opinion of Gauriya Vaishnavas, also lots of Sanskrit scholars. The leading Sanskrit scholar in Australia, he recently did a translation of the Vishnu Purana. And he strongly was saying we should not translate this word varna as caste, because what we know today as caste is not what is being described by the word varna. He translates it as community. He says community is a much better translation. But anyways, we'll get into varnashram more deeply when we get to the varnashram texts later on in the Bhagavad-Gītā. I'm not going to do a thorough discussion of what the texts necessarily mean, because they do mean something, right? The only thing I'm going to touch on quickly is I think there's two extremes, and I think both extremes are wrong, but I think there's a rather large variety of how to interpret the texts regarding, again, women and the different varnas, the different roles in society, more conservative and more progressive takes. The most progressive takes, I think, are a little wrong, right? Those are the ones I will come out against. The most progressive ones which say, oh, you know, it's just how it was back then. People just thought that way. So that's the Bhagavad-Gītā is just saying it, right? We can't say this because we can't say that the transcendental song of God is somehow materially corrupted, right? That it's materially influenced. Krishna, he is saying these things and he's saying them for a reason. And they're not just because he's saying it because he's made a mistake. That's just what people thought at the time. You can also have the most ultra conservative take, which I also think is wrong, right? And they'll say, oh, well, it says, women are less intelligent, therefore women are just stupid, right? That's what some people might take it, right? Women are just lacking intellectual faculties. They're infinitely just dumb, right? There'll be a really conservative take there, which is also wrong for as strong reasons as why the ultra progressive take is wrong. And the reason for that is later on, we'll hear about feminine qualities, and one of them is intelligence in the Bhagavad-Gita. So clearly there's something more nuanced going on here. If of only a few, sections later, we find the Bhagavad-Gita saying that one of the defining elements of women is intelligence. Does that make sense? So it's not making, on the face of it, these texts seem to be making an ultra, almost misogynistic point. But we have to realize that the same person who's writing these is also writing the translations and purports for the later sections, which describe intelligence as one of the qualities, of one of the feminine qualities. So clearly there is a more nuanced point being made here, right? It's not necessarily what our gut reaction, because of course, in today's day and age, we're very sensitive to topics about women, and I think rightfully so. Women have been really mistreated, especially over the past, especially over recent history, right? So I don't think it's an absurd reason to, it's an absurd thing to be sensitive about these issues. But nevertheless, again, we shouldn't let our sensitivity cloud the fact that this text is clearly presenting a more nuanced take on these sort of questions, right? We're going to get deeper into what that nuance is later on. I don't want to address it right now. I want to address it later on when it's a bit more relevant. However, because it comes up, I do want to touch on it. Before we touch on it further, I also want to touch on another thing, which is how we as Gauriya Vaishnavas interact with such material designations, right? Because these are material designation, right? The Varna, what role one plays in society, gender, these are all things which refer to one's material body, right? They are not on the platform of the soul. And Gauriya Vaishnavism, as we know, what is that central rallying cry that Srila Prabhupada says all the time? You are not this body, right? So how does that then work with material designations? And it does work, and it does play a role. Now, I'm not going to go so far to say that we disregard material designations, because otherwise, why does both Prabhupada and Krishna discuss them in the Bhagavad-Gita? But I also want to give some examples about how in our line, in our sampradaya, in our shastras, how material designations are dealt with. Because if we understand this, I think then the later discussions can be contextualized and hopefully not be as potentially disturbing in our readings before we delve deeper into them. So, Gauriya Vaishnava attitudes to material designations. As we know, the Srimad Bhagavatam is what? Amalam Puranam, right? Who knows what Amalam Puranam means?
Spotless.
Yes, it is the spotless Purana. The Srimad Bhagavatam is our highest authority. It is the juice of the ripened fruit of the Vedic literature, right? So all of the Vedic literature has ripened into this beautiful ripe fruit. And then what have we taken? We've taken the juice from it to produce Bhagavatam, right? Not just the fruit itself, but the essence of the fruit, right? And in Srimad Bhagavatam, we find some very interesting narratives, right? Many of us might be familiar with the pastimes of Bali Maharaj, right? Bali Maharaj, he likes to think of himself as ruler of the universe, right? And we won't go into the whole pastime because it's a long pastime. But he thinks of himself as ruler of the universe, and therefore, ruler of the universe, he's got all of these problems, right? And all the demigods, they go and they need help. And we know Krishna, he appears as Vamana Dev. And I'll cut this pastime a little, just abbreviate it. And what he does is, he goes across in 2 steps, he conquers the whole universe. And then he isn't just taking 2 steps, he's Trivikramaha, right? Trivikrama, right? So he's going to take his 3rd step and he puts his 3rd step on Bali Maharaj's head. And then what happens? Bali Maharaj's wife, right? She goes out and she starts speaking on behalf of Bali Maharaj. Yes, spoiler alert. And she speaks on behalf of Bali Maharaj. And what she says is, she says, it is only foolish people, only foolish, ignorant people of demoniac mentalities think that they are the owner and controller of this material universe, which has actually been manifested for the pastimes of Sri Krishna. And who is a personality who thought that the universe was all of his property? Bali Maharaj. Right? Is everyone following along? So, what does Prabhupada write in his purport? Does Prabhupada write, woman should be silent, right? Does Prabhupada say, how dare she speak these things, you know? Because forget about teaching her husband, forget about being more intelligent than her husband. She's chastising her husband indirectly. She's saying he's a fool, you know? And what does Prabhupada write in the purport? Prabhupada says, without his valuable wife, without his intelligent wife, Bali Maharaj would be having no success, right? Bali Maharaj would be lost without the guidance and the instruction of his valuable wife. Here we find the Bhagavatam, right? This is going against all notions of gender roles, right? In the traditional Vedic marriages, the husband becomes the guru of the wife, right? But here we find the material designations do not matter when we are discussing the highest topics, right? Material designations do not matter when we are on the spiritual platform, right? Here we find this in Bhagavatam. Furthermore, than discussing Varna, in some of the Smriti Shastras, right? In some of the Shastras which describe how society should be functioned, it's said that a Shudra should not even hear the recitation of the Vedic mantras. It is said like this. It's even said in some of them that if a Shudra hears the Vedic mantras, they should be punished, right? Not just that they should be taken away, but they should be punished for daring to listen to the Vedic literature, right? And when Srimad Bhagavatam was being spoken, do not think that all the rishis who were there present did not know this Shastra, did not know these Smriti Shastras, right? They were very well aware. So then, when Krishna speaks the Bhagavad-Gītā, when Krishna speaks this highest transcendental knowledge, when he speaks it to Uddhava, and then when he says, you take this knowledge, Uddhava, and you tell it to everyone, including the Shudras, including all of the Varnas. Do not think it wasn't making a point, right? There's a point that's being made there. There's a very intentional idea that, again, on the transcendental platform, all of these material designations aren't that significant, right? Krishna, he explicitly mentions these communities, right? So here we find this in Bhagavatam. But Bhagavatam itself is very far from us, as I mentioned earlier on in this course, right? Bhagavatam is a distant reality. It is the transcendental reality. It's the highest reality, but it's describing times that are very far away from us. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he shows us in his pastimes something very recent. I remember I was talking to Sriman Narasimha Prabhu. He was telling me he relishes Chaitanya Charitamrita because he feels like he can see all of the devotees around him in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the way the devotees are organized, the Sankirtan parties, the book distribution, everything. It's all there in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? And this is true. Chaitanya Charitamrita, we are all still in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes because we are engaging in Sankirtan, right? Because we are engaging in the Sankirtan movement, we are in Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And so Mahaprabhu's pastimes, they define how we practice Krishna consciousness. Let me just check. So there's one pastime, which I think most fully expresses what is the attitude of the Krishna conscious Gauriya Vaishnava devotee to these material designations. And we have the example of Srila Haridas Thakur. Srila Haridas Thakur, as we know, is from a Muslim family, right? And he is a Muslim by birth. Traditionally, society was organized that the Brahmins would be vegetarian, right? And maybe some Kshatriyas occasionally would eat meat, right? In order to build their strength with the protein, right? Vaishyas generally would also be vegetarian, right? But Shudras, they would also eat non-veg, right? They would eat meat, right? So if one eats meat, they are to be considered not so elevated, right? But if one eats dog, one is to be considered to be outside of the Varnas, right? One is considered to be somewhat tribal. Right? But if one eats cow, one eats a cow. If one eats cow meat, they are to be considered outside of humanity in general. They're considered to be demoniac, right? No longer within the system of human society. And it was in this sort of birth that Haridas Thakur takes appearance in, right? By all means, something that was not respected by the Hindu community or by the Muslim community. Both of them constantly abhorred Haridas Thakur. So mistreated he was by the Muslims and by the Hindus, right? Completely mistreated. But he would go along and he would just accept it all. And every time, even though in the temples, they wouldn't allow Haridas Thakur into the temples, even though he was more qualified than anyone else to enter into the temples, what would Haridas Thakur say? He would say, this is only the appropriate way to deal with a fallen soul like myself, right? So, towards the end of Mahaprabhu's pastimes, it is described, Haridas Thakur, he would not eat until he finished his rounds every day, right? And this is a nice practice, actually, to have. He would not eat. And so it was described that Haridas Thakur, he was eating in odder and odder manners, right? Because his chanting was becoming slower and slower. And so because of this, Mahaprabhu became very concerned. We can see here the quality of Haridas Thakur's chanting, right? That Haridas Thakur, just by his chanting slowing down, right? Just by his chanting becoming slightly weaker, apparently, the devotees thought, oh, he must be having some illness, right? How great one's chanting must be that is the first explanation that comes to their minds. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he goes to Thakur Haridas and he says, is everything all right? Your chanting is slowing down, all of these things. What is happening, right? And Haridas Thakur, he says, I'm not suffering from any disease of my body, only a disease of my heart and of my mind. Because I know that your pastimes, they are coming to a close. They are about to be concluded, right? You are about to leave our vision. And I have never asked anything. I've been mistreated all of this time, no matter how I've been treated, right? No matter how many ways that Haridas Thakur had been mistreated, he never once asked anything from Mahaprabhu. He accepted everything, right? But now Haridas Thakur, he says, I would like to make a request, right? And his request is that he may leave our mortal vision, right? He may leave this before Mahaprabhu does. His request is that he will not witness the disappearance of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is the wish of Haridas Thakur, right? Someone who's never wished anything before, but this is too unbearable for him. And even Haridas Thakur, who had so many opportunities to rightfully request so many things and never requested any of them, now he makes this request. And his request comes true, right? He passes away before Mahaprabhu ends his pastimes. And what happens then? We know in general Hindu society, in general Vedic society as well, what is a dead body is considered what? It's considered unclean, right? It's considered unclean. We don't go touching dead bodies, right? It's considered unclean. But what does Gauranga Mahaprabhu do? Gauranga Mahaprabhu takes the body of Haridas Thakur, the body that even when, of course, we do not say that Vaishnavas are dead, but even when the pastimes were happening, even when he was manifesting the pastimes of being alive, this body was reviled and hated by everyone. Muslims, Hindus, everyone hated that body. They saw that body and they saw filth. They saw something to be excluded. They saw something to be rejected. They saw something to be hated. He would be beaten, right? The Muslims would beat him to the point of death almost. The Hindus would reject him as dirty, as a defiling presence. This body, which was seen as so filthy and dirty, even when apparently alive, right? Now, after being, the body left after passing away. Now this body, which even if it had been a Brahmin who had passed away, would be considered unclean. What does Gauranga Mahaprabhu do with this body? He dances with it. He embraces it. He holds it, right? All of those material designations which people use to reject Haridas Thakur, he takes that body and he embraces it. He hugs it, he holds it, and he dances and cries and weeps of the passing of his devotee. Here we find this is the Gauriya Vaishnava attitude to material designations. That when one is taken to the glories of chanting the holy names of the Lord, all of these questions go away. All of these things are taken away. The fire, this Sankirtan Yagya, this sacrificial flame of the Sankirtan movement, is such a great and glorious fire that anything and everything can be burnt in it, including concerns of gender, including concerns of varna, including all of these concerns. Eventually, they are all burnt away insofar as they are poured into the Sankirtan Yagya. This is the Gauriya Vaishnava approach to material designations. So therefore, we should keep this in mind. We are discussing varnashram, we are discussing all these things, and they are valuable. And we will be discussing how they are valuable, and Prabhupada stressed that they are valuable. But we should also not forget that as Gauriya Vaishnavas, our highest concerns is the chanting of the holy names and the execution of Krishna's devotional service, right? All of these material designations then are secondary concerns at most. And therefore we find Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said, my disciple who truly believes my teachings, he will marry outside of his jati. He will marry a different family community, right? He said, not that I'm condemning my disciples who marry within their jati, right? They are allowed to do so. But those who show true bravery in my teachings, they will do this. So I've talked a bit about this, sort of gone off on a tangent, but I think it's important to remember, right? As these topics come up, they are not the sum and substance of our philosophy, right? The sum and substance of our philosophy is Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu dancing with Haridas Thakur's body. This is the sum and substance of our philosophy. So there, as we go along, now we will talk about Arjuna's doubts. So I've written them out again here. We've organized them. In a sense, they're separated like this. And this is how Gurijan Prabhu and quite a few other devotees separate them. However, I find actually they all kind of bleed into each other. These distinctions are really just there to help us remember the rough ideas. The ideas build on each other. They kind of cross over. Text 36, it's completely unclear whether that's part of the first reason or the second reason, right? So don't take this as a strict breaking down of them. They flow. It's like one constant disturbance, right? Okay. So we find these 4 reasons. Sometimes Arjuna's deciding not to fight is listed as the 5th reason, that he's unable to choose, right? It's all too difficult for him to choose. So we'll discuss one more point and then we'll have an activity. And this point is coming back to what does Arjuna teach us? There's another thing that Arjuna teaches us. Because again, when we look at his arguments are good, right? His arguments, they're not bad, right? They make sense. They're well-formed arguments. They're arguments that resonate with us. They're arguments that are real. They're arguments that are very relevant. They're arguments that speak profoundly to us. And there is a significance in that. Krishna can control the pastime. If Krishna wanted to, he could have manifested the pastime that Arjuna says, oh, you know, I think I'm my body and I don't think Krishna is God. And I just really find it hard to eat chicken, to not eat chicken except when it's Tuesdays, right? Like he could have made Arjuna say that, but no, what he's done is he's made Arjuna say very, very strong arguments, right? Arjuna is not presenting weak arguments. Maybe some of you will be familiar with the concept of straw manning, right? In debate, we say that if you're debating somebody else's argument and you misrepresent the argument to be as bad as it can be, or even just that it's not the argument at all, right? Then we say it's straw manning, right? If I say, oh, you know, I just think, I can't think of something, right? If I were to say, oh, you know, I just think it was rather rude what that person did. And then another person says, wow, you hate them because they're black, right? That is straw manning, right? Because it's not responding with what I said. It's twisting my argument into something that's not what I meant in order to make an easy argument to defeat, right? But this is the opposite of straw manning, which is called steel manning. These are some good arguments, right? And they will be refuted, and they are wrong, but these are good arguments. And I think this is important, right? Again, because what does Arjuna teach us, right? Arjuna teaches us how we can approach spiritual life. Sometimes there is this feeling in Krishna conscious communities, and I don't know why, because we're all studying the same Bhagavad-Gītā. And it's this feeling that if you ask difficult, challenging questions, respectfully, mind you, Arjuna asked them respectfully, but if you ask difficult, challenging questions, oh, you shouldn't do that. Why are you challenging the philosophy, right? But Arjuna is still a pure devotee, even if he's bewildered. Arjuna is showing us that it's very good, and I want to encourage that in these Bhakti-śāstrī classes as we go along. Please feel comfortable, as long as you ask the questions respectfully, feel comfortable to ask uncomfortable questions, because this is how we progress in spiritual life. We don't progress by asking just simple things, right? We progress by having our doubts addressed. We progress by having our issues addressed, right? Arjuna is showing us that we don't just go and give simple, easy questions, right? Of course, we can do that, right? My go-to one, it's a simple question, if you will, and although it's a very deep one. If I ever meet a sadhu, I'll ask them, how may I grow in my devotional service, right? Stuff like that is fine, it's always wonderful to hear those realizations. But what Arjuna is showing is that it is not at all wrong to ask these deep and challenging questions. It's not at all wrong to see something that seems wrong to us and to say, this seems wrong, right? This seems wrong. This doesn't make sense to me. Can you please explain it? This is not something that's wrong. So Arjuna, he's showing this, right? With his very, very well thought out arguments. And they might seem challenging because as we go ahead next week and we study the ins and outs of these arguments, we'll find that he backs them all up with really thorough logic that isn't necessarily clear in the text, right? And he's indirectly quoting lots of shastras. He's making good arguments, right? So we should always feel quite comfortable to ask difficult questions in spiritual life. We should never feel uncomfortable to do this, as sometimes, unfortunately, we've seen, right? Sometimes we get this idea, oh, don't cause a fuss, don't ask this, don't ask that. Don't cause a fuss by being rude. Don't cause a fuss by derailing things. Don't cause a fuss by being disrespectful. But by all means, cause a fuss by trying to address your doubts in spiritual life. This is one thing that Arjuna can show us. We're going to conclude on the point that, or things Arjuna can show us before we get to questions. So the other thing that Arjuna can teach us, right, is Arjuna, again, he's dealing with the issues he's dealing with. We might feel, right? We might feel that we can't really relate to it. Most of us will only be in a fratricidal civil war once or twice in our life. It's not a day-to-day reality that we have to deal with. We will not really have to deal with these sort of situations very often. However, the fact that this is a messy situation is showing us again the relevance of the Bhagavad-Gītā. It's not a clean-cut situation. It's not something, sometimes people can ask, why does it have to be something as terrible as a war? Why can't it just be Arjuna's he's upset about this because his uncle passes away or something, right? And the reason why is coming to, I guess, Mrugank Prabhu's point, that this is a messy reality because our reality is a messy reality, right? This is a messy, disturbing situation because our situation is messy and disturbing. Our situation is a difficult one. Our situation is a rough one. Our situation is a complex one with moral compromise and feelings of discomfort and all of these things, right? We will all go through very difficult and confronting moments, and this is the reality we all live in. Just by being compliant in society today, we might say, well, I'm not in a situation where I'm having to fight a war, right? And we're not in a situation where killing is involved, but killing is involved, right? Just by participating in society today, we are indirectly, maybe not directly, but we're indirectly funding the slaughter of countless animals, even if we never buy meat, right? We are facilitating so many systems that are slaughtering so many animals. Even if you buy only vegetarian, you would be surprised how many animals die in the production, not just of milk, right? Lots of calves are killed in the process of making milk. If they're male, they can't produce milk, so they're pointless, right? To the means of the dairy industry. But even with vegetables, right? The amount of animals that need to be killed in order to grow vegetables, you would be surprised, right? So we're all involved in this sense in very, very difficult, ugly situations, right? As we'll read later on in the Bhagavad-Gītā, where there's smoke, there's fire. There is no such thing as pure fire in the material world. All fire, all activities in the material world are tainted by the smoke of the material world, right? So we are all in a messy situation like this. This is why it's on a battlefield. Because we're all in difficult, rough, emotionally challenging situations, right? So again, what does Arjuna teach us? Arjuna is showing, in this example, Arjuna is showing us how we deal, right, with these difficult situations. And Krishna, he's manifesting these pastimes here, again, so that the Bhagavad-Gītā can be oh so very relevant to us. We may not be fighting in a civil war against our cousins and teachers and family, friends and relatives, but we are very much in a very, very difficult situation like this. And therefore the Bhagavad-Gītā is oh so very relevant to all of us. So we can learn all of these things from Arjuna and Arjuna's example. And lastly, what does Arjuna teach us? He is again still, nevertheless, a pure devotee. And Baladev Vidyabhushan and Srila Prabhupada, they both make a wonderful, wonderful point. It's the last line of the final purport of the final shlok in the first chapter. And in it, they say, in this condition, Arjuna is most qualified to receive the transcendental knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gītā. I'm paraphrasing. Baladev Vidyabhushan says the knowledge of the Atma, transcendental knowledge, so on and so forth. Arjuna, now he is most qualified, right? And Baladev Vidyabhushan, he says, he is qualified because he has responded, even though he is now bewildered, right? Even though he has responded materially, he has responded materially with compassion and soft-heartedness, not by anger and violence. Duryodhan, he is there and he is ready for every single person to die because he's frustrated that he doesn't get the throne, right? Arjuna, in order to rightfully establish goodness and to eradicate evil, is still too soft-hearted to fight, right? This is reflecting the soft heart of Arjuna, even if he is doing it, expressing it incorrectly, because of his soft-heartedness. And because of his soft-heartedness at the cruelty of this world, he is ready to receive transcendental knowledge. This is what Arjuna can show us as well, right? What makes Arjuna qualified, and again, coming back to last week, what makes this chapter Arjuna Vishada Yoga, what makes this chapter the yoga of despair, of despondency, right, is that it is showing us that the soft-heartedness, the broken-heartedness that this material world can produce, this compassion for others is not a fault, but it is the way by which we qualify ourselves to understand transcendental knowledge. So on that point, sorry, I was going to have a second activity for this half because I know everyone zones out a bit towards the second half, but it was a bit hard to insert something here because we're a bit, all these topics sort of flow on from each other. But from that, we will conclude the slideshow for today. I'll just say the homework before I ask for questions, because I've realized I tell everyone they can leave as the questions, once it reaches 12, but I've realized that if I ask the questions first, then everyone's forced to stay on until the questions are done. So the homework is continue, if you've already charted out the structure of the first chapter, please read the first 11 shlokas only. Read as much of the second chapter as you'd like, but at the bare minimum, just read the first 11 shlokas. If that's little, and it is very little, that's like 10 minutes of reading, right? If that's little, I'm going to send one class on the first chapter of the Bhagavad-Gītā that I think is really good. It elaborates on quite a few points. I'm going to send that in the WhatsApp group. After you've finished reading, please watch that class. I just think it's a very good class to watch, to listen to. It's a relatively long one, so that should use up all your time. But if you're still then a bit more ambitious, read forward maybe until the 20th text or so of the second chapter. And then, actually, I'll give you the exact number, but read forward until you read until the 30th text of the second chapter, and then block the text out there. So that's differing levels of homework. At the bare minimum, please read the 11 texts and listen to the class. But if you find that easy, because you're just going, storming along, then you can also go up to text 30 and then, bracket out the sections of what is being said, like you did for the first chapter. If you only listen to the class, you can also bracket out the first 10 or 11 words, okay? So as you go along now, any reading I assign, please bracket it out into sections and describe each section. I want that to be like implicit, right? That's implied in a reading being assigned. So yeah, that's the homework. I'll send the class the moment we're done. It's a class by His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu. He's a really great speaker, and he speaks about this first chapter very well, and it'll introduce a few topics, a few concepts that I want to elaborate upon next week as we discuss. Okay, so with that, are there any questions? If there's no questions, we'll have an early mark. So just.
Oh, you said that you're going to share the slides.
Oh, yes. I'll share. Which slides did you want?
Maybe so if we finish up to the chapter 1, maybe introduction to chapter 1, that will be helpful.
Oh, so I'll just give you all my slides then so far.
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
Should be fine.
Just I'm gonna remove one slide. Sorry, my internet cut out for a second. I'm just going to remove the last slide because it has answers to one of the activities, and then I'll send them across. So if you give me like a few seconds, and then I'll do that. Are there any other questions or concerns? If not, we'll have a 5-minute early mark today.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Vancha
Krishna.
kalpa kripa sindhu bhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo ananta koti vaishnava vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu ki jai.
Nandan Prabhu ki jai.